The quiet beginning. The rain had not stopped for 3 days in the small coastal town where Keanu had disappeared after finishing his last film. No reporters knew where he went, no fans could trace him, and even his close friends only received short, polite replies from his old number. People thought he was taking another silent break, but the truth was more complicated. Behind the fogged windows of a quiet wooden cabin near the sea, Keanu Reeves sat at an old desk, staring at a worn photograph of Sandra Bullock. It had been almost 20 years since their first movie together, yet something about her smile still carried warmth through the years. He whispered her name softly, almost afraid the ocean might carry it away. The cabin was filled with sketches, blueprints, and handwritten notes pinned to the wall. Each one carried a purpose. Keanu was not hiding from fame. He was preparing for something. The world had seen him as a hero in films, but this time, he wanted to be one in real life. A few months earlier, during a charity event in Los Angeles, he had learned about a destroyed school in the Philippines that once supported hundreds of children. He had donated quietly, but when he read that the funds never reached the site, something inside him changed. He decided to go himself in secret and rebuild what was lost. He called it his silent mission. Yet as fate would have it, he was not the only one carrying a secret plan of kindness. Miles away, in another part of the world, Sandra Bullock stood in a dimly lit office, reviewing a similar report. Her foundation had also sent aid to the same region, and she had recently discovered that corruption swallowed most of it. When she heard a rumor that someone from Hollywood was already there, rebuilding by hand, she laughed softly, not believing it. But then, a local volunteer mentioned his name. She froze for a moment, staring out the window as rain poured outside. She whispered, "Keanu." 3 weeks later, Sandra quietly boarded a humanitarian flight under a false name. Her brown hair tied back, wearing no makeup, dressed like any other traveler. She wanted to see if it was really him, but also to do something meaningful without cameras or interviews. She had always admired Keanu's humility, his quiet strength, the way he avoided fame's noise. Maybe deep down, she also wanted to reconnect with a part of her life that fame had taken away, the peace of simply helping others without attention. When Sandra arrived at the coastal village, she saw destruction that words could barely describe. Broken homes, children playing with rusted cans, elders sitting beside cracked walls that once held memories. And there, at the edge of the village, stood a man in a simple gray shirt, covered in dust, mixing cement beside local workers. His hair was longer, his beard rougher, but there was no mistaking him. Keanu Reeves looked older, wiser, and completely at peace. She stood still for a while, watching him work silently, his hands steady, his eyes focused. No one around treated him like a star. He was one of them. She approached quietly, her heart beating faster with every step. When he finally looked up, their eyes met, and the world seemed to pause. For a moment, he simply smiled as if he had been expecting her all along. He put down the tools, wiped his hands, and said softly, "You found me." Sandra laughed gently, still breathless. "You make it sound like a game." He replied, "Maybe it is. Maybe it's a mission that needed 2 players." That evening, they sat together on the wooden steps outside the rebuilt classroom, watching the sunset paint the ocean in gold and red. Villagers sang nearby, their laughter mixing with the sound of waves. Keanu handed her a small notebook filled with drawings and notes. "This is what we're building next," he said. "A library, a clinic, a home for the teachers." Sandra turned the pages, touched by the care in every line. She whispered, "You could have told me." He smiled faintly. Some missions are quieter when they're shared with the right person. The days that followed were filled with long hours of labor, planning, and kindness. Keanu and Sandra worked side by side, cooking with the locals, lifting wood beams, painting walls, and comforting children who had lost everything. They laughed together, argued gently about designs, and shared old memories from their acting days. Each evening, when the sun set, they would walk by the shore, their footprints mixing with the tide. What began as a humanitarian mission slowly started to feel like something deeper, a rediscovery of connection, of trust, of two souls drawn by the same desire to heal. But beneath this warmth lay an unseen shadow. One night, while Sandra checked the logistics list under a lantern, she noticed something strange. A few of the supply boxes carried a different code, one she didn't recognize. When she asked a local helper, he hesitated, then whispered that some shipments were being redirected to a private warehouse inland. She felt her stomach tighten. Corruption had found its way again, even here. When she told Keanu, he stayed silent for a long moment. Then he stood up slowly, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. "We'll find out who's behind it," he said. "But no police, no press. Not yet." The next day, the two of them followed a trail through dense forest roads, pretending to deliver supplies. They discovered a small storage site guarded by men in plain clothes. Inside were stolen relief goods, medicine, food, and materials meant for the children. Keanu took photos quietly while Sandra watched in disbelief. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from anger and sadness. Before they could leave, the sound of footsteps approached. Someone had seen them. Keanu grabbed her hand, whispering, "Stay quiet." They ducked behind a truck, holding their breath as two men walked past, speaking in low tones. For a long minute, the air was thick with tension. Sandra's pulse raced, her heart pounding so loud she feared they might hear it. Keanu placed a hand gently over hers, steadying her. His calmness was unshakable. When the men finally left, he looked at her and smiled slightly. "Still good at action scenes?" she whispered, trying to lighten the moment. He chuckled softly. "This time, no stunt doubles." They quietly slipped away, back toward the village, the moon lighting their path. As they reached the cabin, Sandra turned to him and said, "What now?" Keanu looked out at the horizon, the ocean glowing faintly under the stars. "We finish what we started," he said. "But first, we tell the truth." He didn't know that one of the men from the warehouse had followed them back, watching from a distance, taking pictures of his own. The next morning, the villagers woke to a sudden silence. The tools were gone. The workers looked uneasy. Sandra found a note pinned to the door of their cabin. It read only one line, "Leave before it's too late." She looked at Keanu, fear flickering in her eyes. He folded the note slowly and placed it in his pocket. "We're not leaving," he said quietly. "Not until every child has a school to walk into." The waves crashed harder that morning, and the clouds turned dark again, as if the sky itself knew that their silent mission was no longer just about rebuilding. It was about protecting hope itself. And as Sandra stood beside him, watching the storm rise over the sea, she realized something deeper than fear was taking hold. She wasn't just standing beside a man she admired. She was standing beside someone she could trust completely, even when the world turned against them. The storm was coming. But neither of them stepped back, and that was how their silent mission truly began. The storm and the secret, the morning after the warning note, the sea looked wild and endless. Waves crashed against the shore with a sound like thunder rolling through the earth. Villagers moved quickly, tying down their boats and gathering tools before the rain returned. Sandra stood by the window, watching the horizon darken. Behind her, Keanu poured coffee into 2 tin mugs. The smell of roasted beans mixed with salt air, but neither spoke for a long time. Silence carried more weight than words could. When he finally turned toward her, his expression was calm, but his eyes had changed. There was focus in them now, and a quiet readiness for whatever was coming. He handed her the mug, his voice steady. "We'll have to move carefully," he said. "Someone doesn't want this project to finish." She nodded, taking a sip even though her hands trembled slightly. "Who would threaten something like this?" she asked. Keanu stared at the rain-soaked ground outside. "People who profit from broken things," he said. Throughout the day, they continued the work as if nothing had happened. Children painted the classroom walls with bright colors. Local women cooked rice and fish for everyone. The air was filled with laughter again, but beneath it there was a quiet awareness that danger lurked somewhere close. Keanu watched every face, memorizing who carried nervous eyes or whispered too much. Sandra noticed his focus and realized this was not the calm actor she remembered from movie sets. This was a man who had lived through pain, who had learned patience through silence. That evening, as the sun dipped low, The storm finally broke loose. Sheets of rain slammed against the village. Wind tore through palm trees, bending them nearly to the ground. Keanu ran outside with others, securing wooden planks and tarps over the half-built library. Sandra helped carry children into safer homes, her clothes soaked, her hair clinging to her face. Lightning split the sky, illuminating their faces for a brief moment, his filled with determination, hers with fear and admiration mixed together. As night fell, the wind howled through the cracks in the cabin walls. Keanu lit a lantern, and they sat close near the table. Sandra's voice trembled when she spoke. "What if they come tonight?" He looked at her gently, then said, "Then we'll face them together." She looked at him, realizing he meant every word. A sudden knock came at the door, sharp and urgent. Both froze. Keanu motioned for her to stay quiet. He picked up a wooden stick lying near the entrance, moved slowly toward the sound, and opened the door just enough to see a familiar face, Miguel, one of the young local volunteers. His clothes were torn, his face pale. "Mr. Keanu," he whispered, breathing heavily. "They know. They saw your pictures from the warehouse. They said you will pay for exposing them." Keanu's jaw tightened. "How do you know this?" Miguel looked terrified. "Because I heard them talking near the docks. They are coming tonight." Keanu closed the door firmly and turned to Sandra. "We have to move the evidence now." She frowned. "The photos?" He nodded. "And the drive." He reached under the desk and pulled out a small waterproof case. Inside were the memory cards holding proof of the corruption. "If they destroy this, no one will believe what we found." They packed quickly, wrapping the case in plastic and sealing it tight. Outside, the rain kept pounding the earth, making visibility nearly impossible. Keanu led the way with a flashlight, guiding Sandra through the flooded path behind the village. Lightning flashed, revealing dark figures in the distance, too far to recognize, but moving closer. "They're already here," Sandra whispered. Keanu grabbed her hand, and they ran toward the cliffs where the forest met the sea. The path was slippery, and at one point, Sandra nearly fell. Keanu caught her arm just in time, his grip strong but gentle. "Steady," he said softly. "Trust me," she nodded, gasping for breath. The wind whipped their clothes as they reached a narrow cave hidden behind the rocks. They slipped inside, water dripping from the ceiling. Keanu placed the case deep inside a crevice, covering it with stones. "No one will find it here," he said. Sandra looked at him in the flicker of lightning. "And what about us?" she asked quietly. He smiled faintly. "We'll be fine. We always have been." For hours they waited, listening to the storm and distant voices calling their names. Sometimes the wind carried flashes of flashlight beams across the cliffs, but no one came close enough to see them. In that silence, with the ocean raging outside, they talked. She asked about his years of silence, about why he chose this life away from the red carpets. He spoke slowly, his tone filled with reflection. "Fame gives you everything you never asked for," he said. "But kindness gives you what you actually need." She listened quietly, feeling her chest tighten with emotion. "And what do you need now?" she asked softly. He looked at her, his eyes steady. "To finish this, and to know someone else still believes it's worth fighting for." The storm began to fade near dawn. The air smelled of salt and wet earth. They stepped out from the cave and walked back toward the village. The ground was covered with broken branches and debris, but the homes had survived. Children were already helping clear the mud, smiling as they saw them return. Sandra smiled back, her heart filling with pride. But the peace didn't last long. By afternoon, a group of men arrived in black vehicles, claiming to be from a regional authority. They wore fake badges, but Keanu recognized one of the faces from the warehouse. The man smiled thinly. "Mr. Reeves," he said, "you've been very busy." Keanu's tone stayed calm. "We're rebuilding a school," the man chuckled. "You're rebuilding trouble." They searched through the cabins, pretending it was a routine inspection. When they found nothing, they grew irritated. One of them whispered something in another language, and the group began tearing through supplies, scattering everything. Keanu stood his ground, but kept his hands open to avoid escalation. Sandra watched from the doorway, her chest tight with anger. She wanted to speak, but Keanu gave a small shake of his head, his silent signal to stay calm. After half an hour, the men left, leaving a trail of destruction behind. The villagers gathered scared and confused. Keanu turned to them, his voice steady but kind. "Don't be afraid," he said. "We've seen worse storms. We'll rebuild again." His calmness spread through the crowd like light. Sandra watched him in awe. There was something in his presence that steadied everyone around him. That night, when the village was quiet again, Sandra found him repairing a broken lantern outside the library. "You handled that better than anyone I know," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Acting helps," he said. "But this isn't a movie. We don't get retakes." She sat beside him, their shoulders brushing lightly. "Maybe that's what makes it real," she whispered. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars peek through the last of the clouds. Sandra finally turned to him, her voice barely above the sound of the waves. "If something happens to us, people need to know the truth." He nodded. "They will," he said. "But first, we make sure the village is safe." The next morning, Keanu met with Miguel and 2 local elders. He handed them small envelopes, copies of the documents and photos hidden earlier. "If anything happens," he said quietly, "send these to the news agency in Manila." Miguel looked frightened. "They'll come after us too." Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we stay together. That's how we win." As days passed, things seemed to calm down. The men in black didn't return. The library's roof was finished, the walls freshly painted. The children's laughter filled the air again. Sandra found herself smiling more often, her heart lighter with every sunrise. Sometimes she would catch Keanu watching her from across the courtyard, his eyes soft but unreadable. She pretended not to notice, though she felt something stirring deep within her that she hadn't felt in years. But one evening, just as the sun turned the ocean gold, an envelope arrived by boat. No sender, no name. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the 2 of them hidden in the cave with Keanu's hand resting over hers. Written across the bottom were 3 words in red ink. "We still see you." Sandra's breath caught. Keanu looked at the photo, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at her and said quietly, "It's not over." That night, under the sound of distant thunder, Keanu walked alone toward the cliffs where the cave stood. He needed to make sure the evidence was still safe. But when he reached the spot and brushed away the stones, the crevice was empty. The case was gone. He stood in the darkness, the wind rising again, his heart heavy but his face calm. He whispered into the storm, "Someone inside the village took it." And as he turned back toward the faint lights of the village, he didn't notice the shadow moving behind him, someone watching, someone who knew everything. The silent mission was no longer a secret. And for the first time, Keanu realized that the danger wasn't outside. It was already among them. Betrayal in the light. The morning sun rose gently over the battered village, painting soft gold across the rooftops. Birds sang again as if the world had forgotten the storm. But inside Keanu's heart, calm had disappeared. The empty crevice haunted him. The proof they had risked their lives to protect was gone, and someone close to them had taken it. When he returned to the cabin, Sandra was waiting by the door, her face pale and eyes heavy with questions. He didn't need to speak. She saw the truth in his silence. "It's gone, isn't it?" she whispered. He nodded slowly. For a long while, neither said a word. Outside, villagers carried buckets of water, laughing, unaware of the danger returning beneath their feet. Keanu sat on the edge of the table, elbows on his knees, thinking deeply. "Whoever took it knew exactly where we hid it," he said. "And that means they were close when we buried it." Sandra looked at him, her voice soft but tense. "Miguel?" Keanu's eyes flickered briefly. "Maybe. Or someone watching him." He stood up, pacing slowly across the room. His movements were calm, but there was sharpness in every gesture. Sandra followed him with her eyes, seeing a man who carried pain like armor. "You trust people too easily," she said quietly. Keanu stopped and turned toward her. "No," he replied. "I trust until I'm given a reason not to." "That's different." A gentle knock came at the door. It was Miguel holding a basket of fruit. "For you, Miss Sandra," he said nervously. Keanu watched him closely, his calm voice hiding layers beneath. "Come in, Miguel." The boy hesitated, then stepped inside. His eyes darted toward the table, then back to Keanu. "You're quiet today," Keanu said. "Did you sleep well?" Miguel nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. I helped fix the pier this morning." Keanu smiled faintly. "That's good." He took one piece of fruit from the basket, then set it aside. "Miguel, did anyone visit the cliffs last night?" The boy froze for just a second, so quick most would miss it. But Keanu saw it. He had learned to notice what others didn't. "No, sir," Miguel said finally, forcing a smile. Sandra's heart sank. She could see fear in the boy's eyes. Not guilt yet, but fear. Keanu nodded. "Thank you," he said gently. "You can go help the others now." When Miguel left, Keanu looked out the window, watching the boy walk away. "He's lying," he said quietly. "Why would he?" Sandra asked. Keanu sighed. "Maybe he thinks he's helping someone. Maybe they promised him something." As the day went on, Sandra tried to focus on her tasks, organizing new books, checking food supplies, but her mind kept drifting back to Keanu's calm eyes, to the quiet strength in his voice when things fell apart. She wondered how many times he had faced betrayal and chosen to stay gentle anyway. It was something rare. It made her respect him even more deeply than before. That night, Keanu gathered a few trusted locals, men and women who had been there since the beginning. They sat in a circle near the lantern's warm glow, their faces half lit, half in shadow. "Someone has been taking supplies and information," he said softly. "We need to find out who." One of the elders spoke, his voice tired. "There are people here who pretend to help but serve others. We warned you before, but you trusted everyone." Keanu nodded. "I still do, because not everyone breaks faith." While the meeting continued, Sandra walked along the shore to clear her thoughts. The waves shimmered in moonlight, and the air smelled of wet sand. She picked up a small seashell, remembering her childhood summers before fame, before cameras followed her every step. She realized how much peace she had lost over the years, and how strangely she was finding it again, here in danger, beside someone who didn't need fame to feel alive. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until a voice whispered, "Miss Sandra." She turned quickly. It was Miguel. His face was pale, his voice trembling. "They made me do it," he said. "They said they would hurt my sister if I didn't." Her heart clenched. "What did they make you do?" He held out a folded piece of paper, his hands shaking. "They told me to take the case and give it to them. They said they would return it after they copied it. But they lied. Now they want you and Mr. Keanu gone." Before Sandra could reply, a shadow moved behind Miguel. A figure stepped out of the darkness, a man with a scar across his cheek, the same one from the warehouse. "Too late," the man said coldly. Miguel turned to run, but the man struck him hard, sending him to the ground. Sandra screamed, and the man reached for her arm, pulling her roughly. Before he could drag her away, Keanu's voice cut through the air like thunder. "Let her go." He stood a few meters away, a flashlight in one hand, his calmness now edged with danger. The man sneered. "You should have stayed in your movies, Reeves." Keanu stepped closer, his eyes steady. "And you should have stayed away from children's futures." The man pulled a small knife, pointing it toward Sandra. Keanu didn't flinch. "You won't use that," he said quietly. "Not with the whole village watching." Indeed, figures began to appear behind him, villagers holding torches, stepping out one by one. The man hesitated, then shoved Sandra aside and ran into the dark. Keanu rushed to Miguel, checking his pulse. "He's breathing," he said softly. Sandra knelt beside him, tears mixing with sea spray. "He was trying to fix his mistake," she whispered. Keanu looked at her, his expression unreadable. "And now we have to fix ours." They carried Miguel back to the cabin, where he rested through the night. Sandra stayed beside him, refusing to leave. Keanu watched her quietly, noticing the way her hands trembled when she brushed the boy's hair from his forehead. Later, when the storm outside had softened into drizzle, he brought her a blanket. "You should rest," he said gently. She looked up, eyes red. "How do you stay so calm when everything falls apart?" He smiled faintly, because falling apart is just another way of finding what matters. The next morning, Miguel woke weak but alive. His first words were barely a whisper. "They have the drive. They're taking it to the city tonight." Keanu leaned closer. "Where?" The boy pointed toward the main road beyond the mountains. A black van. Near the old radio tower. Keanu stood, his mind already moving. "We'll intercept it," he said. Sandra frowned. "You mean we're going after them?" He nodded. "We can't let them destroy the only proof we have." She stared at him for a moment, torn between fear and admiration. "You're risking everything," she said. He smiled slightly. "So are you." As night fell again, they set out together on motorbikes borrowed from villagers. The road climbed steeply through the mountains, lit only by their headlights. The air grew colder, the forest thicker. Keanu led the way, scanning the horizon for movement. Sandra followed close behind, gripping the handles tight, her heart racing not just from fear, but from the thrill of purpose. The sound of the engines echoed through the night like a heartbeat. Near the radio tower, they saw the van parked under dim light. 2 men stood guard, smoking. Keanu turned off the bike and signaled Sandra to wait. He moved like shadow, silent and sure. When one guard turned away, Keanu stepped forward, grabbed his arm, and pushed him quietly against the wall until he passed out. The second turned, startled. But Sandra picked up a small stone and threw it toward the bushes, drawing his attention long enough for Keanu to move behind him and disarm him. They opened the van. Inside were boxes of stolen supplies and the waterproof case. Sandra exhaled in relief, her hands trembling. "You found it?" she whispered. Keanu smiled faintly. "We did." But before they could take it, headlights flashed across the clearing. Another vehicle arrived, larger, filled with men. "Go," Keanu said quickly. "Take the case and run." Sandra shook her head. "Not without you." He looked at her, his eyes soft but firm. "You have to. They don't know you have it." She hesitated for a heartbeat that felt like eternity. Then, reluctantly, she grabbed the case and slipped into the forest. Keanu turned to face the oncoming lights. The men stepped out, shouting orders. He raised his hand slowly, speaking calmly. "No one needs to get hurt," he said. "You got what you wanted," the leader sneered. "You think we're leaving witnesses?" A punch struck him across the face, but Keanu didn't fall. He stared at the man, breathing steady. "You can take everything," he said softly. "But you can't silence kindness." They didn't understand his words. They only saw resistance. Blows rained down. But he endured quietly, his strength not in fighting back, but in refusing to let hate take root. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Sandra ran barefoot through mud and roots, clutching the case. Tears blurred her vision. Behind her, she heard shouts and gunshots echo faintly through the hills. She stumbled, falling hard, but rose again, whispering his name like a prayer. "Please be alive." She reached a small village outpost at dawn, where she collapsed into the arms of a kind old woman. The villagers hid her and the case, promising to contact authorities. Exhausted and trembling, she sat by the window as the sun rose again. The light fell across her face, warm and golden, but her heart felt cold. She whispered, "Keanu, please hold on." Back at the clearing, silence settled. Smoke from the burned van drifted into the morning sky. The men were gone. Only scattered footprints and broken branches remained. And among them, near the base of the radio tower, lay Keanu's bracelet, the one Sandra had seen him wear since the first day. She didn't know it yet, but the world was about to learn of what happened in that hidden mountain road, and their silent mission was about to become a story the whole world would watch, because some love stories